Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Hey there, Jim.
Well, John, as I live and breathe, it's you.
We're back.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be back. How you?
I'm good. I am surprisingly good. We're up to season 4, episode 11, for anyone keeping track,
I'm not.
which means we're almost halfway through season 4. We have
How can that be?
Today's interview is a pretty good get.
Yeah.
He doesn't do a lot of podcasts, and he's not a household name, but you've seen his work. You've seen his writing. You'll see more of it because he has more movies coming out. He's written movies, he's written plays, he's done adaptations, and he is one of the most eloquent and sardonic people I know. I met him at a wedding 30 years ago in which I sat at the edge of a table while he conversed with a bunch of other playwrights. And I thought, I bet this is what the Algonquin Round Table was like.
Yeah.
I will be Harpo. I will be Harpo,
Yeah.
and I will just sit quietly and listen.
Just sit and listen. That's smart. That's what I do almost all the time. As you'll find out in this interview, I don't do a lot of talking in this one. But this one, I was thrilled because he's a Minnesota guy, or at least he is now. And you say he's not a household name. He certainly is a household name here in Minnesota in the theater community.
Yes,
and he's
absolutely.
Not just a household name, he's a big name. And so to get a chance as a Minnesota actor to talk to this particular playwright was thrilling for me.
Yeah, he writes all kinds of things. He wrote Tuesdays with Morrie, which is running everywhere. He's written all kinds of different things, but I think his special love is mysteries. And since this is a podcast ostensibly about a mystery series, it makes the most sense to talk to someone who really has mystery in his bones. There's always been, I think, a strong connection between the idea of magic and mysteries. And that's how we kick things off with Jeffrey Hatcher to find out, when did mysteries enter his life? I wanted to talk to you today about mysteries. The podcast is about a magician, but I think a good mystery is like a good magic trick, in that it's surprising, and sometimes you don't want to know how it's done, or when you go back and look how it's done, you go, well, that was just stupid. I should have figured that out. And Jeff, since you have dabbled in a lot of different kinds of mysteries, you seem like a perfect person to talk to about that. So I will jump in with, can you remember your very first mystery, a movie, book, TV show, play, a mystery that really captured your imagination?
I was thinking about this, and what came to mind was a Disney movie called Emil and the Detectives from 1964. So I would have been 6 or 7 years old. It's based on a series of German books by Erich Kästner about a young man named Emil and his group of friends who think of themselves as detectives. So I remember that. I know that might have been the first film. I'm thinking the first and obviously it's not a play, because little kids don't tend to go to stage thrillers or mysteries. Like, Daddy, please take me to Sleuth. But there was a show called Burke's Law that I really loved. Gene Barry played Captain Amos Burke of the Homicide Division in Los Angeles, and he was very rich. That was the bit. The bit was that Captain Burke drove around in a gorgeous Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, and he had a chauffeur, and every mystery was structured classically as a whodunit. In fact, I think every title of every episode was "Who Killed Cock Robin?" "Who Killed Johnny Friendly?" That kind of thing. And they would have a cast of well-known Hollywood actors, so they were all of equal status. Because I always think that's one of the easiest ways to guess the killer, is if it's like unknown guy, Derek Jacobi, unknown guy, unknown. It's always going to be Derek Jacobi.
Yeah, it's true. I remember that show. He was really cool. He was really slick.
Well, now I'm going to have to look that up.
It had a great score. And he would gather all of the suspects, at the end of the thing. I think my favorite was when he caught Paul Lynde as a murderer.
Oh my God!
And of course, Paul Lynde, kept it very low key. when he was dragged off. You know, it was like he did his Alice Ghostly impersonation as he was taken away.
They did have very similar vocal patterns, those two.
Yeah, they're kind of the exact same person.
Yeah.
I never saw them together.
You might have been Bewitched.
I do believe.
Yeah, you're probably right. You're right. You're right.
Well, I might be wrong about this. Either Alice Ghostly or Charlotte Ray went to school with Paul Lynde. And Charlotte Ray has that same sound too.
Yeah.
You know, kind of warbly thing.
Yes.
I think they went to Northwestern in the late 40s and early 50s. So maybe that was a way that they taught actors back then.
Well, they learned it all from Marion Horn, who had the very same warble in her voice. So as you got a little older, were there other mysteries that you were attracted to?
Yeah, luckily my parents were very liberal about letting me see things that other people probably shouldn't have. I remember in I think late in elementary school, 5th grade or so, I was reading Casino Royale, and you know, one of the teachers said, "Well, you know, most kids we wouldn't want to have read this, but it's okay if you do." And I thought, what's that mean? That I'm so not dangerous. You know, other kids are, oh, well, they would be affected oddly by James Bond. But yeah, I love spy stuff. You know, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and The Wild Wild West, all those kind of things. I love James Bond. And very quickly I started reading, you know, the major mysteries. I think probably the first big book that I remember, the first novel, was Hound of the Baskervilles. That's probably an entrance point for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
So that's what comes in mind immediately.
Yeah, I certainly revisit that on a, if not yearly basis, at least every few years, I will reread The Hound of the Baskervilles. Love that story. That's good. You do have, Jeffrey, favorite mystery fiction writers?
Oh, sure. But, you know, none of them are, you know, bizarre Japanese Santo Domingo kind of writers that people always pull out of their back pockets to prove how cool they are. I mean, they're the usual suspects. They're Conan Doyle and Christie and Chandler and Hammett, you know, all of those, John Dixon Carr, all the locked room mysteries, that kind of thing. So, I mean, I can't say that I go very far off in one direction or another to, you know, pick up somebody who's completely bizarre. But if you go all the way back, I love reading Wilkie Collins. I've adapted at least one Wilkie Collins, and they read beautifully, you know, terrifically put together, and they've got a lot of blood and thunder to them. I think he called them sensation novels as opposed to mysteries, but they always have some a mystery element. And it was just, you know, he was a close friend of Charles Dickens, and Dickens said that there were some things that Collins taught him about construction. You know, and in those days they would write their novels in installments, you know, for magazines. So, you know, the desire or the need, frankly, to create a cliffhanger at the end of every episode or every chapter seems to have been born then from a capitalist instinct.
Jeff, I know you studied acting. What inspired the move into playwriting?
I don't think I was a very good actor. I was the kind of actor who always played older, middle-aged or older characters in college and high school, like Judge Brack in Hedda Gabler kind of people, or you know, my dream back in those days was to play Dr. Dysart in Equus and Andrew Wyke in Sleuth. So, I mean, that was my target. And then I moved to New York and I auditioned for things, and casting directors would say, well, you know, we actually do have 50-year-old actors in New York, and we don't need to put white gunk in their hair or anything like that. So why don't you play your own age, 22 or 23? And I was not very good at playing 22 or 23. But I'd always done some writing, and a friend of mine, Graham Slayton, who was out at the Playwright Center here, and we'd gone to college together, he encouraged me to write a play, you know, write a one act and then write a full length. So I always say this. I think most people go into the theater to be an actor, you know, probably 98%, and then bit by bit, we peel off. You know, we either leave the profession completely or we become directors, designers, writers, what have you. So I don't think it's unnatural what I did. You know, it's very rare to be like a Tom Stoppard who never wanted to act. It's a lot more It's normal to find the Harold Pinter, who acted a lot in regional rep shows in England before he wrote The Caretaker.
Fascinating. Can we talk about Columbo?
Oh yes, please.
This is where I am so tickled pink for this conversation, because I was a huge and am a huge Peter Falk Columbo fan, and I went back and watched the episode Ashes to Ashes with Patrick McGowan that you created. Just tell us how that came about?
Well, I too was a huge fan of Columbo in the 70s. I remember for most of its run, it was on Sunday nights. It was part of that murder mystery wheel with things like Beck Ramsey and McLeod, right? But Columbo was the best of those, obviously. And the everything from the structure, the inverted mystery, to the guest star of the week, which was, sometimes it was somebody very big and exciting, like Donald Pleasance or Ruth Gordon, but often it was slightly TV stars on the skids.
Jack Cassidy.
I was just going to say Jack Cassidy.
But at any rate, I loved it. I remember in high school, a friend and I doing a parody of Columbo where he played Columbo and I played the murderer of the week. And so many years later, when they rebooted the show in the 90s, my father died, and I spent a lot of time at the funeral home with the funeral director. And having nothing to say to the funeral director one day, I said, "You got any good stories?" And he told me all these great stories about, bodies that weren't really in the casket and what you can't cremate, etc. So I suddenly had this idea of a Hollywood, funeral director to the stars. And via my agent, I knew Dan Lauria, the actor. He's a close friend, or was a close friend of Peter's. And so he was able to take this one-page idea and show it to Peter. And then one day I got a phone call, and I said, "Hello, Jeff, this is Peter Falk calling. I want to talk to you about your idea." And, they flew me out there. It was great fun, because Falk really ran the show. He was the executive producer at that point. He always kind of ran the show. I think he only wrote one episode, the one with Faye Dunaway, but he liked the idea. And because I spent a lot of time with him, I'd go to his house where he had his, he would do his drawings back in his studio and all that. But what he said he liked about it was he liked a new setting. They always liked a murderer and a setting that was special, with clues that are connected to, say, the murderer's profession. So the Donald Pleasance one about the wine connoisseur and all the clues are about wine, or the Dick Van Dyke one where he's a photographer and most of the clues are about photography. So he really liked that. And he said, "You got to have that first clue and you got to have the pop at the end." So, and we worked on the treatment, and then I wrote the screenplay. And then he asked McGowan if he would do it. And McGowan said, "Well, I'll do it if I can direct it too." And, I adored McGowan from, Secret Agent and The Prisoner. I mean, I'd say the Prisoner is like one of my favorite television shows ever, So the idea that the two of them were going to work together on that script was just, it was incredible.
Were you able to be there during production at all?
No, I went out there about 4 times to write, because it took like a year or so. It was a kind of laborious process with ABC and all that. But I didn't go out during the shooting. Occasionally, this is, the days of faxes, I'd get a phone call, "Can you redo something here?" And then I'd fax it out. So I never met McGowan. I would only fax with him. But, they built this whole Hollywood crematorium thing on the set. And Falk was saying at one point, said, "Well, I'm getting pushback from Universal that we've got to do all this stuff. We've got to build everything." And I was saying, "Well, 60% of the script takes place there. If you're going to try to find a funeral home like it, you're going to have all that hassle." And, eventually they made the point that, it's to build this is going to cost less than searching around Hollywood for the right crematorium, that kind of thing. And it had a great cast. It had Richard Libertini and Sally Kellerman.
Rue McClanahan.
Rue McClanahan was our murder victim.
I'll tell you, every scene that Peter Falk and Mr. McGowan had together, they looked, to me as an actor, like they were having a blast being on
They
set together.
they really loved each other. They first met when McGowan did that episode By Dawn's Early Light, where he played the head of the military school. It's a terrific episode. It was a great performance. And although their acting styles are completely different, Falk much more, 50s methody, shambolic, and McCoon very, very, his voice cracking, and very affected and brittle. But they really loved each other, and they like to throw each other curveballs. They would, there are things in the show that are ad libs that they throw. There's one bit, I think it's hilarious. It's when Columbo tells the murderer, basically knows he did it, but he doesn't have a way to nail him. And McGowan is saying, "So then I suppose you have no case, do you?" And Falk says, "No, sir, I don't." And he walks right off camera, like down a hallway. And McGowan stares off and says, "Have you gone?" And none of that was scripted. Just Peter walks off set. And if you watch the episode, they had to dub in McGowan saying, "Have you gone?" because the crew was laughing at the fact that Peter just strolled away. So McGowan ad-libs that, and then they had to cover it later to make sure the sound wasn't screwed up.
Fantastic.
Kudos to you for that script, because every piece is there, every clue is there, everything pays off. It is so tight, and it has that pop at the end that he wanted. It's really an excellent mystery.
And a terrific closing line. Terrific closing line.
Yeah, that I did right. That was not an ad lib, but that
it's a fantastic moment. And Peter Falk looks just almost right at the camera and delivers that line as if it's, "Hey, check this line out." It was great. I enjoyed every minute of it. Can I ask some questions about Sherlock Holmes now?
Oh, yes.
So I enjoyed immensely Holmes and Watson, that I saw it a couple summers ago at Park Square, and was completely riveted. Had absolutely no idea how it was going to pay off, or who was who or what. And when it became clear, it was so much fun for me as an audience member. So I know that you have done a number of Holmes adaptations. There's Larry Millett, a St. Paul writer here, has done a number of, and I know you adapted him. But as far as I can tell, this one, Pillar to Post, was all you. This wasn't an adaptation. You created this out of whole cloth. Am I right on that?
Yes, the idea came from doing the Larry Millett one, actually, because Steve Hendrickson was playing Holmes, and on opening night, the day of opening night, he had a aortic aneurysm, and they had to repair, and so he wasn't able to do the show. And Peter Moore, the director, directed. He went in and played Holmes for a couple of performances, and then I played Holmes for like 3 performances until Steve could get back. But in the interim, we'd sat around saying, "All right, who can we get to play the role for like a week?" And we thought about all of the usual suspects, by which I mean tall, ascetic-looking actors, John Middleton, or and everybody was booked, everybody was busy. So Stephen D. Ambrose, the people who played Holmes, nobody could do it, so that's why Peter did it, and then I did it. But it struck me in thinking about casting Holmes that there are a bunch of actors that you would say, "You're a Holmes type. You're Sherlock Holmes." And it suddenly struck me, okay, back in the day, if Holmes were real, and he died and he'd gone over the falls of Reichenbach, people probably showed up and said, "Well, I'm Sherlock Holmes," And so I thought, well, let's take that idea of casting Holmes to its logical conclusion, that a couple of people would come forward and say, "I'm Sherlock Holmes," and then we'd wrap it together into another mystery. And we were sitting out, Bob Davis was playing Watson, and Bob, and I said, "So, maybe, they're all in a hospital and Watson has to come to figure out which is which." And Bob said, "Oh, of course Watson's going to know which one is Holmes." And that's what immediately gave me the idea for the twist at the end, why Watson wouldn't know which one was Holmes.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful whenever an idea comes quickly like that, but it depends on Steve getting sick usually.
Well, thoroughly enjoyable. If it's ever staged again anywhere, I will go. There was so much lovely about that show, just in terms of it being a mystery, and I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan. But when I don't want to give too much away in case people are seeing this at some point, but when it starts to be revealed, when Pierce's character starts talking about the reviews that he got in the West End, I almost wet myself with laughter. It was so perfectly delivered and well written. I had just a great time at the theater that night.
It's one of those things where, well, you know how it is. You get an idea for something, and you pray to God that nobody else has done it. And I couldn't think of anybody having done this bit. I mean, some people have joked and said it's kind of to tell the truth, isn't it? Because you have three people who come, I'm Sherlock Holmes, I'm Sherlock Holmes, I'm Sherlock Holmes. Now, surely somebody has done this before, but nobody had.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's all in the timing.
Great time.
So
Yeah.
what's the hardest part about adapting Holmes to the stage?
Well, I suppose from a purist point of view, by which I mean people like the Baker Street Irregulars and other organizations like that, the Norwegian Explorers here in Minnesota, is can you fit your own, they always call them pastiches, even if they're not comic, can you fit your own Holmes pastiche into the canon? You know, people spend a lot of time working out exactly where Holmes and Watson were on any given day between 1878 and 1930. So one of the nice things about Holmes and Watson was, okay, so we're going to make it take place during the 3-year interregnum when Holmes is pretending to be dead. And it works. If you fit Holmes and Watson in between the final problem and the adventure of the empty house, it works. And that's hard to do. I would say, I mean, I really love Larry Millett's book and all that, but I'm sure it doesn't fit, so to speak. But that's if you care. You know, if you're not a purist, you can fiddle around any old way you like. But I think it's kind of great to have the BSI types, the Baker Street Irregular types, say, yes, this clicked into place.
So if that's the most difficult thing, what's the easiest part?
Well, I think it's frankly the language, the dialogue. I mean, somebody pointed out that Holmes is the most dramatically depicted character in history, more than Robin Hood, more than Jesus Christ. There are more actor versions of Holmes than any other fictional character. And, you know, we've been surrounded by Holmes speak, either if we've read the books or seen the movies or seen any of the plays, for over 140 years, right? So in a way, if you're like me, you kind of absorb that language by osmosis. So for some reason, it's very easy for me to click into the way I think Holmes talks. You know, that very cerebral, very fast, sometimes complicated syntax. That I find probably the easiest part. You know, working out the plots, you want them to be Holmesian. You don't want them to be plots from, you know, don't want the case to be solved in a way that Sam Spade would or Philip Marlowe would. And, you know, that takes a little bit of work. But, yeah, for whatever reason, it's the actor in you, you know? It's saying, all right, if you have to ad-lib or improv your way Sherlock Holmes this afternoon, you know, you'd be able to do it, right? I mean, he really has permeated our culture, no matter who the actor is.
Speaking of great actors that have played Sherlock Holmes, you adapted a movie that Ian McKellan played, and I just watched it recently in preparation for this interview. Having not seen it before, I was riveted by it. His performance is terrific and heartbreaking at the same time. Can we talk about that? How did you come to that project? And just give us everything.
Well, it's based on a book called A Slight Trick of the Mind by Mitch Cullen, and it's about a very old Sherlock Holmes in Surrey tending to his bees, as people in Holmes land know that he retired to do. And it involves a couple of cases, one in Japan and one about 20 years earlier in his life that he's trying to remember. And it also has to do with his relationship with his housekeeper and the housekeeper's son. The book was given to me by Ann Carey, the producer, and I worked on it probably off and on for about 5 years.
Wow.
And was put together. A lot of time was spoken about casting, because you had to have somebody play very old. I remember I went to meet with Ralph Fiennes once because we thought, well, Ralph Fiennes could play him at his own age, then probably his 40s, and with makeup in his 90s. And Ralph was in another film that I'd done, and he said, oh, I don't wear all that makeup. That's just far too much. And I said, well, in Harry Potter and the English Patient, you kind of look like a melted candle. And he said, yes, and I don't want to do that again. So we always had a very short list of actors, probably like 6 actors in the whole world. And McKellan was one of them. And we waited for him to become available. And yeah, he was terrific in it. I'll tell you one funny story one day. He had a lot of prosthetics. Not a lot, but enough. He wanted to build up his cheekbones and his nose a bit. He wanted a bit. He thought his own nose was a bit too potato-ish, so he wanted a more Roman nose. So, he was taking a nap one day between takes, and they brought him in, said, Ian, it's time for you to do this scene. And he'd been sleeping, I guess, on one side, and his fake cheek and his nose had moved up his face. But he hadn't looked in the mirror and he didn't know. So he came on set and said, very well, I'm all ready to go. And it was like Quasimodo. It's like 5:52 and they're supposed to stop shooting at 6. And there was a mad panic of fix Ian's face, get that cheekbone back where it's supposed to be, knock that nose into place. We got to, after 6 o'clock, we go into overtime. But it was very funny that he hadn't noticed it. You kind of think like, you'd feel if your own nose or cheekbone had been crushed, but of course it was makeup, so he didn't feel anything.
This is just the actor fanboy in me. I'm an enormous fan of his work straight across the board. Did you have much interaction with him, and what kind of fella is he in general?
He's a hoot. Bill Condon, the director, said, Ian is kind of methody. So when you see him on set, he'll be very decorous. He'll be kind of like Sherlock Holmes. And it was true. He was, oh, Jeffrey Hatfield, very good to meet you. And he was kind of slow talking, all that. And Ian was like 72 then, so he wasn't that old. But then when it was all over, they were doing all those, remember those ice dumps where people would tub of ice on you? There were these challenges. And then at the end of shooting, they had this challenge, and Ian comes out in short shorts, and a bunch of ballet dancers surrounds him. He's like, all right, everyone, let's do the ice challenge. And, he turned into, this bright dance. He's kind of a gay poster boy. Ever since he was one of the most famous coming out of the last 20-some years. So, he was suddenly bright and splashy, and, all that old stuff dropped away. He has all of his headgear at his house, in his townhouse. He had a party for us at the end of shooting. And so there's Gandalf's weird hat, and there's Magneto's helmet, along with top hats and things like that. And they're all kind of lined up there. And then people in the crew would say, can I take a picture of you as Gandalf? Oh, why, of course. And he does all that stuff. So, he's wonderful.
You do a very good impression as well. That was great. Now, how did you come to the project, The Good Liar, which, again, I watched in preparation for this and was mesmerized by the whole thing, especially the mystery part of it, the ending. It was brilliant. How did you come to that project?
Well, again, it was a book, and Warner Brothers had the rights to it. And because Bill and I had worked on Mr. Holmes, Bill Condon, Bill was attached to direct it. And so I went in to talk about how to adapt it. And, this is kind of odd. It's again based in McKellan. the meeting room at Warner Brothers, there was a life-size version of Ian as Gandalf done in Legos. So it'll be Ian McKellan and somebody in The Good Liar, Ian as the con man. And that one kind of moved very quickly because something changed in Bill Condon's schedule. Then they asked Helen Mirren, and she said yes very quickly. And it's a very interesting book, but it had to be condensed rather a lot. There's a lot of flashbacks and going back and forth in time. And we all decided that the main story had to be about this one con that had a weird connection to the past. So a lot of that kind of adaptation work is deciding what not to include, So you can't really be completely faithful to a book that way. But I do take the point with certain books. When my son was young, he'd go to a Harry Potter movie and he'd get all pissed off because he'd say Dobby the elf did a lot more in the book. But if it's a book that's not quite so well known, The Good Liar isn't a terribly well known book, nor was A Slight Trick of the Mind. You're able to have a lot more room to play.
It's a very twisty story, and now that you're talking about the book, I'll probably have to go get the book and read it just for comparison. But in what I saw on the screen, how did you keep it? Because it was very clear at the end. It was, and it hits you like a freight train when it all sort of unravels and you start seeing all of these things. How did you keep that so clear for an audience? Because I'll admit, I'm not a huge mystery guy, and I'm not the brightest human, and yet I was able to follow that story completely.
Well, again, I think it's mostly about cutting things out. I'm sure there are various versions of the script where there are a lot of other details. There's probably too much of one thing or another. And then, of course, you get in the editing room and you lose a couple of scenes too. These kind of things are very tricky. I'm not sure that we were entirely successful in doing it, because you say, which is more important, surprise, suspense? Hitchcock used to have that line about, well, suspense is knowing there's a bomb under the table, and then you watch the characters gather at the table, as opposed to simply having a bomb blow up and you didn't know about it. So we often went back and forth about, should we reveal that the Helen Mirren character knows that Ian's character is doing something bad, or do we try to keep it a secret until the end? But do you risk the audience getting ahead of you? I don't mind if the audience is slightly ahead. It's that feeling you get in the theater where there's a reveal and you hear a couple of people say, "Oh, I knew it," and they guessed it maybe a minute before. But you don't want to get to the point where the audience is, 20 minutes or half an hour ahead of you.
I certainly was not. I was not in any way. It unfolded perfectly for me in terms of it being a mystery and how it paid off. And Helen Mirren was brilliant. In fact, for a long time during it, I thought they were dueling con men. The way it was set up in the beginning, where they were both entering their information and altering facts about themselves, I thought, oh, well, they're both con men. And now we're going to see who is the better con man in the end. And so when it paid off in a way different sort of way, it was terrific for me. Absolutely delightful.
And I thank you. But in a way, they were both con men.
Yes, but she wasn't a professional con man. She just
out to steal the money from him. She was out for something else. She was out for vengeance.
Yes. Very good. If you haven't seen it, The Good Liar, folks, don't wait. I got it on Amazon Prime, and so can you.
I watched them do a scene. I was over there for about 5 days during the shooting, and watching the two of them work together was, just unbelievable. The textures, the tones, the little lifts of the eyebrow, the shading on one word versus another. Just, wonderful, wonderful stuff.
Yeah. And it's, I will say I am a huge Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, along with my son. We came to those together, and I'm a big fan of that sort of movie. And so I was delighted by this because it was such a taut story, and I was involved in every second of what was going on and couldn't quite tell who the good guys were and who the bad guys were and how is this going to work and who's working with who. And it was great. And in my head, I was comparing my love for that sort of big blow it up with ray guns story to this very cerebral, internal, and I loved it, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think, as close to middle America as you're going to find in terms of a moviegoer. And I thought it was just dynamite.
It was very successful during the pandemic. So many things were when people were streaming, but it was weirdly successful, when it hit Amazon or Netflix or whatever it was. And I think, you don't have to be British to understand, two elderly people trying to find a relationship, and then it turns out that they both have reasons to hate and kill each other.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, there is still a relationship there. Yeah. So I pictured a lot of lonely people watching The Good Liar and saying, yeah, I'd hang out with Ian McKellan even if he did steal all my money.
Well, speaking of movies, I am occasionally handed notes here while we're live on the air from my wife, and she wants you to just say something about the adaptation you did of your play Stage Beauty and what that process was like and how that process went.
That was terrific primarily because Richard Eyre, who the director who used to run the National Theater and all that, because he's a theater man, and the play is about theater. And so, I loved working with Bill Condon, and I've loved working with Lasse Hallström and other people. But Richard, was the first person to direct a film of any of my stuff. And, he would call me up and say, well, we're thinking of offering it to Claire Danes, or we're thinking, and, usually you just hear later, oh, somebody else got this role. But the relationship was more like a theater director and a playwright. I was there on set for rehearsals and all that, which I haven't in the others. No, it was a wonderful experience. But I think primarily because the culture of theater saturated the process of making it and the process of rehearsing it. And again, his level of respect, it's different. It's in Hollywood, everybody's very polite, but they know they can fire you, and they can fire you, and they're going to have somebody else write the dialogue if you're not going to do it, or if you don't do it well enough. In the theater, we just don't do that. It's a different world, a different culture, a different kind of contracts too. But Richard really made that wonderful. And again, the cast that he put together, Billy Crudup and Claire and Rupert Everett and Edward Fox and Richard Griffith. I remember one day when I was about to fly home, I told Richard Griffith what a fan my son Evan was, of him in the Harry Potter movie. And he made his wife drive an hour to come to Shepperton with a photograph of him as Mr. Dursley that he could autograph for my son.
Well, speaking of stage and adaptations, before we go into our lightning round here, I just want to ask you quickly about, you did 2 recent adaptations of existing thrillers, not necessarily mysteries, but thrillers, one of which Hitchcock made into a movie, which are Dial M for Murder and Wait Until Dark. And I'm just wondering, what was that process for you? Why did changes need to be made, and what kind of changes did you make?
Well, in both cases, I think you could argue that no, changes don't need to be made. They're wildly successful plays by Frederick Knott, and they've been successful for, alternately 70 or 60 years. But in both cases, I got a call from a director or an artistic director saying, we'd like to do it, but we'd like to change this or that. And, I'm a huge fan of Frederick Knott. He put things together beautifully. The intricacies of Dial M for Murder, you don't want to screw around with. And there are things in Wait Until Dark having to do just with the way he describes the set. You don't want to change anything, or else the rather famous ending won't work. Mm-hmm. But in both cases, the women are probably not the most well-drawn characters that he ever came up with. And Wait Until Dark, oddly, they're in a Greenwich Village apartment, but it always feels like they're really in Westchester or, in Terre Haute, Indiana. It doesn't feel like you're in Greenwich Village in the 60s, especially not in the movie version with Audrey Hepburn. So the director, Matt Shackman, said, why don't we throw it back into the 40s and see if we can have fun with that? And so the whole war and noir setting allowed me to play around with who the main character was. And I know this is a cliche to say, well, can we find more agency for female characters in old plays or old films? But in a sense, it's true, because if you're going to ask an actress to play blind for 2 hours a night for a couple of months, it can't just be, I'm a blind victim and I got lucky and killed the guy. You've got to have somewhat better dialogue and maybe some other twists and turns. So that's what we did with Wait Until Dark. And then at the Old Globe, Barry Edelstein said, well, you did Wait Until Dark. What about Dial M? And I said, well, I don't think we can update it because nothing will work. The phones, the keys. And he said, no, keep it in the 50s. But what else could you do with it? What else could you do with the lover? And he suggested, so I credit Barry with this, why don't you turn the lover, played by Robert Cummings in the movie, into a woman and make it a lesbian relationship? And that really opened all sorts of doors. It made the relationship scarier, something that you'd really want to keep a secret in 1953. And I was luckily able to find a couple of other plot twists that didn't interfere with any of Knott's original plot. So, in both cases, I think it's like you go into a watch, and the watch works great, but you want the watch to have a different appearance and a different feel when you put it on and tick a little differently.
We've kept you for a way long time, so let's do this as a speed round. And I know that these questions are the sorts that will change from day to day for some people, but I thought each of us could talk about our favorite mysteries in 4 different mediums. So, Jeff, your favorite mystery novel?
And Then There Were None. That's an easy one for me.
That is. Jim, do you have one?
Yeah. I don't read a lot of mysteries. I really enjoyed a Stephen King book called Mr. Mercedes, which was a cat and mouse game, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. That's only top of mind because I finished it recently.
That counts.
Does it?
Yeah, that'll count.
You're going to find that I am so middle America in my answers.
That's okay. Mine is, I'm going to cheat a little bit and do a short story, which is the original Don't Look Now that Daphne du Maurier wrote, because as a mystery, it ties itself up. Like I said earlier, I like stuff that ties up right at the end, and it literally is in the last 2 or 3 sentences of that short story where everything falls into place. Jeff, your favorite mystery play can be one of yours if you want.
It probably it's a battle between Sleuth or Dial M for Murder. I don't maybe Sleuth because I always wanted to be in it, but it's probably Dial M. But it's also followed up very quickly by Death Trap, which is a great comedy mystery thriller, because it's kind of a postmodern meta play. It's a play about the play you're watching. So
yeah. Excellent choices. My choice is Sleuth. You did have a chance to be in Sleuth because when I directed it, you were the first person I asked, but your schedule wouldn't let you do it. But you would have been a fantastic Andrew Wyke. I'm sorry our timing didn't work on that.
And you got a terrific Andrew and Julian Bailey. But if you wanted to do it again, I'm available.
Jim, you hear that?
I did hear that. Yes, I did hear that.
Let's do Sleuth again, because Michael Levin can step back into that part. Do you have a favorite mystery play?
It's going to sound like I'm sucking up, but I don't see a lot of mystery plays. There was a version of Gaslight that I saw with Jim Stoll as the lead, and he was terrific. But I so thoroughly enjoyed Holmes and Watson and would love the opportunity to see that a second time. I saw it so late in the run, and it was so sold out that there was no coming back at that point to see it again. But I would love to see it a second time and think to myself, well, now that you know what you know, are you going to be, is it all there? Because my belief is it is all there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Jeff, your favorite TV mystery?
Oh, Columbo. That's easy. Columbo.
I'm going to go with Poker Face, just because the pace on Poker Face is so much faster than Columbo, even though it's clearly based on Columbo. Jim, favorite TV mystery?
The Rockford Files, hands down.
Fair enough. All right, last question all around. Jeff, your favorite mystery movie?
Laura.
Good one. I'm going to go with The Last of Sheila. If you haven't seen The Last of Sheila, it's a terrific mystery directed by Herbert Ross, written by Stephen Sondheim and Anthony Perkins. Fun little Stephen Sondheim trivia. The character of Andrew Wyke and his house were based on Stephen Sondheim.
No.
Yeah.
Sondheim's house has been for sale recently. I don't know if somebody bought it, but for a cool 7-point-something million, you're going to get it.
All right, let's maybe pool our money.
Absolutely.
Jim, your favorite mystery movie?
This is going to be, I'm walking into the lion's den here with this one. As Jeffrey, I hope this is okay, but I really enjoyed the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movies, and I revisit the second one in that series on a fairly regular basis, The Game of Shadows. I thought I enjoyed that a lot. Is your thoughts on those movies quickly?
My only feeling about those is that I felt they were trying a little too hard not to do some of the traditional stuff. I got it, like no deer stalker, that kind of thing. But I thought it was just trying a tad too hard to be, everybody's very good at kung fu, that kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. And it's Sherlock Holmes as a superhero, which appeals to me. And that's all.
I know the producer of those, and I know Guy Ritchie a little bit. And I know they're still trying to get out a third one.
Well, I hope they do. I really hope they do, because I enjoyed that version of Sherlock Holmes quite a bit. I thought it was funny, and all of the clues were there, and it paid off in the end as a mystery, but fun all along the road.
And the main thing they got right was the Holmes and Watson relationship, which, as anybody will tell you, you can get a lot of things wrong, but get that right, and you're more than 2/3 there.
It's that Holmes-Watson relationship. He's absolutely right. I'm rewatching Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, and they nail the relationship.
Yeah, and I appreciate him being kind enough to me when I asked about the Robert Downey Jr. Jude Law movies, because they probably are. He talked early on about being in canon and out of canon, and these are pretty out of canon. Holmes never exhibited in any of the stories an ability to fight with kung fu. I don't think, and I've read most of them. I've read all of them, I should say. So these are a little outside the canon, but he was kind to me, and he's right, getting the relationship right, and they did between Watson and Holmes in the Jude Law, Robert Downey Jr. movies. They got that right, and they're, I think, very enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, they are. And another one that people might want to check out if you want to get the relationship right between Holmes and Watson is Christopher Plummer and James Mason in Murder by Decree.
Murder by Decree.
In which James Mason is just exceptional.
James Mason is exceptional, period. He's go see Heaven Can Wait. He's tremendous. I've never seen him do bad work.
I don't think he ever did. Well, maybe early on he did.
Who knows?
I was surprised that Mr. Hatcher does a pretty good Peter Falk impression and a Patrick McGowan impression.
It was great. What I would not have given to meet. I was never a big Patrick McGowan fan. I appreciate him, but Peter Falk, I love. I love and have from the moment I saw him in Columbo. But the cement for the Peter Falk relationship was the movie The In-Laws. That, gee whiz, I watched that probably, well, if not once a year, once every couple, just because it's so good. And you want to talk about relationships? That relationship between Peter Falk and Alan Arkin is tremendous. And in the remakes of the movie, they did not get that right.
No.
And because they didn't get that right, the remake did not, for me, did not work. But I was comparing it to something that I love dearly. So,
and we have Alan Arkin to thank for that, because he saw Peter Falk on the Tonight Show and he thought, I think we'd work really well together.
Yeah.
And called him and said, do you want to do this? He said, yeah, whatever. Yeah, let's do it. And then the story about they're having lunch while shooting, and you can do the lines better than I can, but it's, Peter Falk starts describing where and how to get this sandwich. And Alan Arkin says, wait, hold it. Stop talking. Tell me that while we're shooting.
Next time we're in Tejada, Shell, don't let me forget. they make a chicken sandwich here. They serve it on a hard roll. They heat it up with orange juice, you know, grande, a big one, or pineapple juice, and coffee. Do you take coffee, Shell? Espresso with that beautiful foam. Oh, Jesus, pigs.
Exactly. They serve a chicken sandwich with a large orange juice. El Grande, they call it. Next time we're in Tejada, Shell. It's a great movie. Great movie. Stop the podcast, watch The In-Laws, pick us up right here. Yeah,
You know, you've inadvertently led us right into a new segment. Well, I've been thinking for months that we should do a little segment called I Love That, which is shamelessly ripped off from John August and Craig Mason's podcast Script Notes. And at the end of every episode, they have a one cool thing that each one offers. And so we're going to do that. We're going to try to remember to do that every episode. And the concept is simple. We're going to just talk briefly about something that we love that other people might enjoy. And it's not going to be something you can't see or can't find or can't do, because that's not fair and that's not fun. So I'm going to kick it off with right now with this episode's I Love That, because we were talking to Jeffrey Hatcher, who wrote Columbo, and there was a recent TV series which sort of updated Columbo called Poker Face, created by Ryan Johnson. Ryan Johnson would be known by people who like or don't like Star Wars as someone who did one of those Star Wars movies. I don't remember which one because I'm not into that. But he also did the movie Knives Out. And is that what I'm loving? Well, I did like that a lot. But no, he was really inspired by a movie from the early 70s that you can find on your streaming services. And it's called The Last of Sheila. And he really leaned on that movie when he did the sequel to Knives Out, Glass Onion. He really leaned on Last of Sheila. But it's simplicity itself. It's a bunch of friends gather on a rich friend's yacht. And he says, let's play some games.
2 hours to game time, gang. Let me describe the week's entertainment for you.
The last time I played a game was charades.
At my house a year ago, the night Sheila was killed.
As a matter of fact, everyone here was
there. Except Lee, you were homesick in Santa Barbara, you said.
No, I was homesick of Santa Barbara, I said.
I like any game where you don't have to move. Well, you don't have to for this one, if you're smart enough. Meaning?
Well, it's sort of... I call it the Sheila Green Memorial Gossip Game. Sounds fascinating.
And murder ensues. It was written by Stephen Sondheim and Anthony Perkins, based a little bit on some of the scavenger hunt puzzles that Sondheim and Perkins would do in and around New York when they had parties. People would have to traipse out of the apartment and go find things. It's directed by Herbert Ross, who directed The Goodbye Girl and other classics. And it's got a cast that you could only have in the 70s. James Mason, Richard Benjamin, Diane Cannon, Raquel Welch, James Coburn, and youngish and not too evil Ian McKellan, of all people. It's called The Last of Sheila. It's a twisty, funny, well worth seeking out movie. And that's my I love it this time. I love that.
I love that. All right. I am watching a Netflix series and reading the book. And specifically, this is for everybody, but really it's closed circuited to you, Mr. Gaspard.
Okay.
You may or may not know of this already, but there is a series and a book called Five Came Back. It is about the Hollywood directors.
Yes, I've heard of this.
Frank Capra, John Huston, John Ford, who enlisted and were put to work by the War Department producing films to try to both support the war, keep up morale at home, and it's just fascinating.
America stands at the crossroads of its destiny.
In the early years of Hitler's rise, moviegoing had become an essential part of American culture. But Americans did not realize the extent of the threat Hitler posed.
5 filmmakers wanted to respond as so many millions of men and women responded. They chose to serve.
These documentaries were powerful for American audiences.
The footage proved that the enormity of the task was worth it.
These 5 men, they were saying goodbye to families who never knew if they would return.
And yet, coming out of it, each one made their greatest film.
I believe a film should have something to say. I think it should make people think and feel long after they've left the theater.
And it's narrated by a who's who of Hollywood directors now, Spielberg and Coppola. And I mean, it's so fascinating to see how they're, just trying to figure it out. Who'd ever done this? I'm going to make a film not about war. I'm going to make a film of war and try to use that in a way. So it's just, I love that. I love that. You can see it on the Netflix, or you can, like I did, Kindle the book. So I'm doing both at once.
Or maybe get the book from the library.
Whatever you want. I don't judge. You do whatever you want.
So that's 5. 5 came back. And
5
The Last of Sheila, 2 things that we love this episode.
And
I know what I think. I know something you love.
I do, because we should just get down to business. Now, if I'm correct, I think it was chapter 10 that I read last time.
You did.
So before we launch into chapter 11, give us all a quick recap of 10.
Sure. In chapter 10, Harry gave us a quick update on what happened to Tracy, who had to be hospitalized briefly. Then he heads out somewhere mysterious that Eli doesn't quite know where Harry's going. Eli heads over to the hospital to check on Tracy. He finds out that Megan is going to be part of Quentin's act. Commiserates with Nathan about that. He gets a call from Deirdre, and then he heads out to talk to the next suspect. And that takes us right into chapter 11.
Chapter 11. You have not met a serious collector, my friend, until you have come face to face with a comic book collector. I felt I had, in fact, come face to face with a couple of serious collectors in the past week, but the large crowd which browsed excitedly through the Glendower comic store seemed to establish the veracity behind his statement. "Are you having a sale today?" I asked, surveying the large crowd with something akin to envy. "Today? No, this is pretty typical. You should be here on a Wednesday." I looked over at him, and he answered my question before I could ask it. "New comics always come out on Wednesday," he explained. "When does new magic come out?" I'd only been talking to Randall Glendower for 5 minutes, but we were already at a point in our relationship where he felt it was okay to kid me about the lowly status of magic in the world today, at least compared to the seemingly endless popularity of comic books. Randall was, to put it kindly, a striking individual. Nearly as round as he was tall, he was wearing a multicolored T-shirt, which gave him the appearance of a beach ball with stubby legs. His head was covered with a shaggy mess of dirty blonde hair, which morphed seamlessly into a disheveled dirty blonde beard, providing his head with an odd, shaggy nimbus. Glendower Comics took up the prime center spot in a block-long strip mall in Bloomington, a first-ring suburb, best known as the home of the Mall of America. The store was a bright explosion of color and images and posters and toys, with a dizzying amount of inventory and a large T-shirted staff. Classic rock played through the speakers and was interrupted on a nearly constant basis by the ringing of cash registers. "Let's get on to my office to talk," Randall suggested as he started waddling toward an adjoining room. "It's a little tough to have a real conversation in this environment." It would have been equally difficult to have a conversation in the next environment as well. The second room was full of gamers, seated at long tables around game boards with playing cards and figurines. Some gamers were in the midst of heated but muted play, while others sat quietly, painting their game pieces or reading up on the latest strategy. The room had the look and feel of a Gothic library and was in stark contrast to the circus-like feeling of the main room. Randall continued forward toward a door on the far wall, and moments later, we had descended a wood-paneled staircase and entered the strangest environment yet. "Is this your parents' basement?" I asked, looking around at what appeared to be a large-scale version of the basement of a suburban geek kid. "Almost exactly," he said, beaming with pride. "I've supersized it, of course, but it's exactly what it looked like when I was a teenager, right down to the same harvest gold shag carpet." "As a teenager, you had life-size models of Yoda, C-3PO, and R2-D2, I asked, gesturing to the trio of figures looking back at us from the far corner. "Actually, no, but I dreamed about it," he said with a laugh as we moved through the room. "I have more resources at my disposal these days." The source of those assets was visible in the next room, a small, dark office with a computer desk, keyboard, and 2 large monitors. He gestured me into an overstuffed armchair as he settled into the seat in front of the screens. "The comic book store, the game store, it all pretty much just breaks even. This," he said, pointing to the website visible on one monitor, "is what pays for everything else." By this, he meant the Geek in the Know website, the most visited and most debated site on the internet for information, rumors, and opinions on the latest and greatest movies, TV shows, comic books, graphic novels, and games of interest to geeks, fanboys, and other mere mortals. "And it all started in your parents' basement, right?" Randall nodded. "That's the legend, but in this case, you can print the legend, 'cause it's true. Just me and a laptop, recycling, and early on, manufacturing rumors about the top upcoming genre movies. And now," I said, "an empire." He nodded in thoughtful agreement. "I suppose so. Never underestimate the power of anticipation and disappointment as a valid economic model." He'd lost me with the last statement, and my face must have indicated this confusion, so he pointed at the website on the screen. 60% of the content on the site is about movies and TV shows that are in production, or might be in production, or might go into development, or might. Endless energy is exerted by our readers as they conjecture and debate and argue about how a project might turn out, or why a project is doomed to failure, or the finer points of why a particular project should never even have been considered. He reached under the computer desk and popped open a cabinet door, which revealed a small refrigerator within. He rummaged around and pulled out a soda for himself and then gestured to me. I nodded, and he tossed a can to me before continuing his explanation. I was surprised to see it was a vintage brand I hadn't seen since I was a kid. "Where'd you find this?" I asked, turning the can over and inspecting it. It looked exactly like I remembered. "I thought they stopped making it like 20 years ago. I got a bottling plant in Thailand to start manufacturing them for me. I sell them on the internet to cover costs, but that's basically a break-even proposition." He turned his attention back to the computer monitors. "Anyway, what might be takes up about 60% of the site. The other 40% of the content consists of readers complaining about those same movies and TV shows once they've been completed, how they don't live up to their expectations, how the story has been mangled, or again, how they never should have been made in the first place." He took a long sip from his pop can. "Anticipation and disappointment," he declared with a satisfied sigh. "The yin and yang of internet success." "That's a unique business model," I said. I held the can at arm's length away and popped it open. A mild but manageable amount of soda sprayed harmlessly into the air. "But how does a person make money at it?" "The bulk of the income comes from advertising," he continued. "You know, banners and pop-up windows. Plus, anytime a reader clicks on a link, we harvest that information and sell it to the advertisers. We also take a small percentage from sales on the marketplace." "Marketplace?" "That's a section on the site where people can sell memorabilia or put up requests for things they're looking for. If a sale happens, we get a small cut." "Would someone like Tyler James place items for sale in the marketplace? Randall shrugged. He might have, but most of what passes through the marketplace would be pretty small change for a broker like Tyler. He leaned forward with sudden speed and hit some keys on the keyboard. One of the two screens instantly switched images, becoming a window into a series of moving lines and flashing red dots. These are real-time metrics of traffic on the sites and subsites, he said, pointing to the ever-changing lines and blinking lights. The cosmic light show on the screen was mesmerizing, and it was apparent the site was far more popular than I had imagined. It's very busy, I said, not taking my eyes off the screen. Oh, this is nothing. I can make it spike like mad if I want. He got a devilish look in his eyes. For example, we've got a rumor we're releasing today for one of the studios. There are plans to remake a famous movie, he said, going on to name the classic film. I gasped. That's ridiculous, I said, feeling outrage beginning to grow from deep within. That movie is a classic. To touch it, to remake it, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. My voice had risen an octave, and I turned to Randall, who was beaming at me. Never underestimate, he said, the power of anticipation and disappointment. He tapped some keys on the keyboard. Let's see what happens when we release that rumor, he said, giving one key a final flourish as he tapped it. We waited for several long seconds, quietly looking at the metric screen. For a moment, I thought nothing was going to happen. And then the lights started to flash. Lines spiked up, more red lights. Lines went higher. The screen began to resemble a pinball machine on overload. I turned to Randall. I'm sure my mouth was hanging open. And that, he said, leaning back in his chair, is how I can afford to do business with someone like Tyler James. Did you do a lot of business with him? Randall shrugged. A little here, a little there. I mean, he presented more stuff to me than I ever bought, but he knew where my interests lay and wasn't afraid to let me know what was out there. Did he approach you about London after midnight? Randall nodded. He did indeed, and I told the police that. Really? Even though it was technically stolen merchandise? I didn't care about that, he said, finishing his soda and reaching into the fridge for another. If my offer had been accepted, I planned to turn it over to the National Film Registry or the Library of Congress and let them deal with the paper trail. You didn't want to own it? Oh, sure. What are you, nuts? He laughed. Of course I wanted to own it, but I didn't need to own it. I really just wanted to make sure it was preserved so people could actually see it. But your offer wasn't accepted? He shook his head, still clearly disappointed by the outcome. I got outbid. Can I ask what your bid was? $500,000, 10% down. That means the winner offered $750,000 with $75,000 down. That's what I'm guessing, and the police seem to agree. Our conversation was interrupted by a jittery, squeaking sound coming from down the hall. I leaned toward the doorway and was surprised when a small, brown, excited monkey suddenly came leaping into the room. It jumped past me and climbed up into Randall's lap, causing him to nearly spill his soda on the computer keyboard. He set the can aside and turned his attention to the pint-sized creature, which was about the size of a tiny dog. You have a monkey, I said, stating the obvious. Yes, this is Jinx. He's a Java McKay monkey. I squinted at Randall and his little friend. Isn't it illegal to own them as pets? It sure is, but he's not a pet. Jinx is the managing editor for the site. He's on the masthead. He gets a paycheck and everything. I suppose that makes all the difference. The small creature ran up one of Randall's arms, across the back of his neck and down the other arm, with Randall laughing the entire time. He looked over at me, grinning as widely as he had since I met him, and keep in mind, he'd been grinning a lot. Eli, as a kid, didn't you ever want a monkey? Only always. Me too. He sat back, stroking the monkey's tiny head lovingly. You know, it's weird. There's so many things I wanted when I was a kid, and now I have them all. And you know what? What? is great. Just great. The two of them together look like a Norman Rockwell painting. If Rockwell had ever attempted to capture a warm, heart-tugging human-simian relationship. Randall gave Jinx a quick kiss on the head, and the monkey returned the bus with what sounded to me like a happy squeak. On the metric screen, the lines continued to grow and the lights continued to flash like a freaked-out pinball machine.
Jim, were you ever into comic books?
I really was not. There was maybe like a 2-week period where I was hanging out with some buddies who liked comic books. And so I thought, well, maybe I would like comic books. And it turns out I didn't really. But having said that, as I mentioned in the interview, I am a huge Marvel Cinematic Universe fan. I came to those through my son, and we enjoy those immensely, as we do the Lord of the Rings movies. So,
well, I wasn't into comic books either as a kid, although I certainly knew,
not at all.
I knew people who, collected whatever day of the week new comics came out, and still to this day have them in plastic, cased in plastic, and that never really, I never really got into that. But just like Randall Glendower in the book, I did always want a monkey. Did you always want a monkey?
Haven't you always wanted a monkey?
Doesn't everybody want a monkey? And speaking of comic books, in the back of some of those comic books and or monster magazines, which I did buy and love, you could, at that time in the 70s, send away for a spider monkey. And it wasn't that expensive. They'd send you a spider monkey.
I know. I never did that.
No, I didn't either, but only because my parents would have, I was a Catholic school kid and there were rules and I followed them for the most part.
Yeah.
And monkeys would be.
There's a definite mention of the spider monkey in the Ten Commandments.
Did I cross the line? Yes, look behind you. No monkeys at my house. 3 dogs, though.
Yeah, that's like having 1 monkey. 3 dogs equals 1 monkey. All right, well, we'll continue with the next chapter next time, which would be chapter 12 of The Miser's Dream. We're also going to revisit an idea from 2 of my, I'll say this, favorite magicians in the world, Morgan and West. You didn't get a chance to talk to them last time. We're going to replay something really interesting they had to say about mentalism. And I hope to get them back on next season because...
Yeah, I'd love to be able to talk to them because I do really enjoy their work and I have their book. So
yeah, 2 smarter guys you're never going to find.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So
that's next time. We're going to do chapter 12 of The Miser's Dream and then a few words from Morgan and West. Until then, watch The Last of Sheila and watch 5 Came Back.
I think you should.
Yeah, we'll see you then, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.